You're listening to the Headless WP podcast, where we discuss all things headless WordPress. The Headless WP podcast is a production of the WP Engine Developer Relations team. If you're interested in more content on headless WordPress, check out developers.wpengine.com for blog posts, tutorials, videos, and more. All right. Welcome to the Headless WP podcast. I am Jeff Everhart, and we are joined today by Salma Alam-Naylor. And she is a staff developer experience engineer at Netlify, formerly of Contentful. So she's got a lot of experience working in the JAMstack space, working with other headless CMSs. And she is also a very prolific tech blogger and Twitch streamer. So we'll leave a couple of links to Salma's site and her Twitch channel in the show notes. So definitely check those out. And as always, I'm joined by Fran. So how's it going, y'all?
Good, thanks. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Excellent.
I'm actually super excited. This is such a treat because let me just quickly say to the audience out there who's followed me, the very small audience of my followers, I probably would have quit web development if I did not run into Salma's tutorials. The first time I saw her was on the Learn with Jason show when she was working at Contentful, and they did a GraphQL Next.js JAMstack memories kind of site with the link and the prefetching and all that, and the dynamic route file with GraphQL. And Jason Langsdorff too is a friend of mine. And when Salma started to explain the stuff that I was having a hard time with, I was like, oh, I'm going to stay in this because there's people like her who can take the super complex and then break it down into a simplified form where a newbie developer at the time, and sometimes I feel like I don't know anything still, can fully understand it. So Salma, thank you. And then that Algolia Contentful Next.js blog too helped me push forward my career. So it's a super treat for me.
Do you know what? There are times that make me remember why I do this job. And this is one of them. I always say that whatever I do, whatever I put out there, whatever content I create, as long as I can help one person, then my job is done and it makes me happy. So that made me happy. So thank you.
Absolutely. And
yeah,
Jeff,
and I think
we're
actually
having trouble with Algolia. Maybe that I'll
yeah, I'm definitely going to go check out that post now, because I stumbled onto a post of yours, I think last week. I was looking at fancying up our meta tags for Slack unfurls on our documentation. And you'd written a great tutorial on how to get the most bang for your buck there. So thanks for that. It was helpful to me, and I'm sure it was helpful for a lot of people. And I think that's one of the cool things about writing, developer focused posts on the internet, is so many people are searching for this stuff. You have the opportunity to be impactful to a lot of folks.
And a lot of the stuff I write are pretty much just notes to myself. So if I'm helping myself and other people at the same time. That's a great tactic for blogging, by the way. If anyone's looking to get into blogging, just write stuff that you'd want to read, and there you go. It's useful to someone.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people describe it as their external brain, and I'll do the same thing, right? So if I've had to look up something more than twice, I'll write myself a post about it, so I know that at least it's there, and I don't have to go searching in Google search results for it.
Man, I swear, every time either
you need to get blogging, Fran.
Absolutely. Well, so first question on my mind here is, obviously Salma and I, we worked together for a short stint at Netlify. That was super awesome because I used to bug her in Slack all the time about things. But for our listeners, for those that don't know you, and our listeners out there who are not familiar, can you give us a little bit of a history of background as far as what you did before tech and in music and education, and how you got to be one of my favorite musicians?
So don't let out my little secret that only really you know. I was a musician growing up. There was no way I could access tech where I lived, and it was the 90s, and it was a very small place, and we didn't have the internet like we have it today. Even though I always wanted to be in tech, I wrote my first lines of code on a Commodore 64 when I was 6 years old, and I was hooked. But there was no way for me to explore that properly. So I got into music. I did a degree in composition in Manchester. That's why I live in Manchester now. I never left. And I went on to do all different types of teaching. And the biggest highlights were I was teaching kids in rock bands. It was called the School of Rock and Pop, a little bit like Jack Black in the School of Rock. I was that
yes.
for a while. And then I thought, well, I quite like this teaching gig, to be honest. I'll go and qualify and be a qualified teacher so I can teach in schools in the UK. And I did that for a few years. I was teaching kids aged 11 to 18, music and music theory. And I was teaching like flute and other theory stuff on the side. But then I decided I can't do this anymore. There's too many like political intricacies in teaching, and I just didn't have the mental space for that at the time. So I just quit. And I ended up working in a call center for minimum wage for a little while, and so started right from the bottom. And long story short, I kind of got my first tech job through that call center because I had graphic design on my CV. It's such a weird long story, but the moral of this story is that so I got this job at this small like magazine startup in a very tiny place above a furniture shop. Oh, wow. And there was one developer there who managed the front end, the back end, the CMS. He built his own CMS and the infrastructure and the DevOps. And I showed an interest in the tech. And so he took me under his wing and mentored me for 6 months. So I was kind of teaching him how to teach, and he was teaching me tech. I was learning PHP, and I learned like CoffeeScript before JavaScript and Sass before CSS. I was like in the deep end. But that job then led to a number of front-end jobs, and I quickly moved to being a tech lead. And then at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, I started streaming on Twitch, mainly to increase the representation of different types of people who were streaming coding on Twitch at the time, because I didn't see anyone doing front end. I didn't really see many women. So I thought, hey, I'll do that. And I was using my teaching to, like you say, Fran, to try and help make things accessible and break things down. And then through streaming on Twitch, I got my first job in DevRel at Contentful. And basically through meeting Jason and Cassidy Williams last year and winning a Jammy Award last year in JAMstack Conf, I got my job at Netlify, and here I am with you today.
Oh, very cool. So I feel like I got to circle back and ask some questions. So I'm a musician too. So what instruments are your favorite?
So piano, I think, because you can create a whole full accessible experience on piano. Like playing a single instrument like the flute is great, and flute was like my main instrument growing up, but just playing a single flute melody kind of thing isn't as accessible to people compared to like playing a full piano piece. So that's why I like the piano, and I can I still play piano a lot, and I like to just chill out and indulge myself in that. But if I'm gonna, I also like electronic music and live looping and improvising and all sorts of fancy like new technology instruments. Nice. I ordered almost a year ago, I ordered a Roly Seaboard, which is like a 5D expressive touch keyboard thing, which is being delivered in maybe like 6 weeks, and I've been waiting for it for so long.
That's so cool.
So I like to get involved in stuff like that. And I actually once did a live improvisation music stream with my husband for our 10-year wedding anniversary in 2021, but that's the only time we've done it.
Oh, that sounds so cool. And I'm always just amazed. Like there tends to be a lot of musicians in the developer community. And I don't know. There's probably some research out there about what the connection is, but it's always interesting.
I'll tell you my hypothesis. My hypothesis is I think writing code is exactly like writing music. in any case, the way I approach writing code is the way I approach writing music in terms of motifs and little repeatable patterns like functional programming. One bit does one thing. And then like you're telling a story with a piece of music, and also you're kind of telling a story with a piece of code. And so I have a lot to say on this that I haven't really like formalized in proper words on a blog yet, but it's coming. Something will happen.
Oh, yeah. No, I like that. So I like that. My thinking on it is like, I mean, at least in Western music, right? You have this whole series of notes organized around like whole and half steps. And like, do I know why it's like that? Because somebody made it that way in the past. And so it's sort of like this arbitrary system of rules, right? Just sort of like a programming language is. And then you have all these other dialects that have different rules. And if you look at like, you know, Indian instruments like the sitar and stuff, like they have a whole different series of tones. So I kind of feel like as musicians, like we just accept that this is the way that it is. And so I'm not like, why do I need a semicolon here? It's just like the way that it is. And I just move on and continue making motifs and repeatable patterns.
I mean, music is a language, isn't it? JavaScript is a language, and English is a language. And it's all just based on putting patterns together, isn't
Syntax, yeah.
I feel like it's funny because I feel like a lot of musicians translate into being some kind of scientific, either good coders or like scientific geniuses. Like Jeff, Salma, who's the lead guitarist of Queen, and he's like a physicist. What's his name again? I can't remember.
Brian May.
Brian May, yeah, and he's like he's like doing quantum.
He's literally
physics
an astrophysicist.
He's like
and he had his whole like guitar system was totally custom. Like he'd done everything from the ground up. Like I don't even think you can replicate that because like he built every piece of his stack, if you will, to get that awesome tone, which is kind of neat. It's also really nice to hear that you have a teaching background. So both Fran and I think, come from teaching backgrounds. I originally went to teach English and sort of like you got disenchanted with the politics of large scale education. And I think that's really sad because get in large systems like that, you have a bunch of creative people and it's not really set up like that all the time.
I think as well, like,
go ahead, Salma, go ahead.
Again, as well, I think one of the biggest things that upset me was that music, despite its absolute benefit to living a life, is not like something that's prioritized in most schools because of the way we have been conditioned to grow up and have to do English, maths, and science. You know, I mean, very fair, very valid, but, you know, at the expense of creative subjects, which is a huge shame because I think there are a lot of kids who could benefit from really being, you know, put deep into music and deep into being creative because not everyone learns the same. Everyone learns in different ways, needs different things, needs different external stimuli. So it's a big shame.
It is. And like, despite being data driven in one way, like I feel like there's probably a ton of data that's like, if you let everybody play music, you'd probably be better at English. You'd probably be better at math and all of these other things. So it's like, can you not see the overlap? And that's also sad.
Salma, I had one quick question that you mentioned before Jeff asked his, but and this could be just yes or no, to have to be long-winded. You mentioned PHP early in your career. Did you enjoy writing PHP? Were you neutral about it, whatever, or? I
have no opinions about programming languages because they're just a tool. Okay. And, you know, I actually worked a lot in WordPress at the beginning of my career, like standard full-on monolithic WordPress. I was very, very familiar with it. I haven't done it for a few years, but, you know, that's one of the things that I like to tell people as part of my brand is that it's just code. It's just tech. Like you can enjoy using a thing, but like the extent that some people get a little bit silly about it is not for me. And so, you know, just use what you like, use what you want, use what gets the job done. And PHP is great.
I agree. Yeah. Cool.
Well, so we've got to segue into our next question. So I know you spent a lot of time working in the front end space and probably as a result have used a lot of different front end frameworks in your career. And so maybe we'll get an answer similar to the one we just got, but do you have like a current favorite and why?
See, again, don't have a current favorite, but there are things that I would use over other things based on the job that I need to get done. And that's why I'm actually building a new tool to help people choose their next front-end framework based on the features that their project needs. So at the moment, I think we're too like inundated and too overwhelmed with use this because it's got the biggest hype machine. Use this because XYZ uses it and says it's good, right? But I'm trying to remove all that bias. I'm trying to remove all that hype and trying to help developers make an informed decision basically based on two things. This is very early stages. It's a huge prototype. It's called What the Framework, WTF. And I've collected all of the frameworks that exist, JavaScript based, that are at least version 1, and they've been maintained this year. And they are filtered by the type of website they build, whether that's like static or dynamic or somewhere in between, and whether they offer either a single page application or a multi-page application. And those are basically the two things you need to decide on. And then you get shown frameworks based on that. And so hopefully it will allow people to discover new ones that they've never used before, potentially, that will fit their use case. And also, I kind of just wanted to put all frameworks on the same kind of level to say, like, use what you want, use what you know, use what's fit for the job, and let's just all have fun.
Yeah. That I think that makes sense because, talking to Jeff, when we had Fred over from the guys over at Astro, the folks on the Astro team, similarly, the attitude and the approach on his end was like, hey, Astro is content driven. It's a framework that's content driven. So you have a site with a headless CMS and you're pulling content, use Astro, but anything that's like super application-y and dynamic, you know what I'm saying? You might want to use something else, but it's that attitude that like, hey, you know what? There's a right tool for the right job. There's not just like one silver bullet in the world that we all play in. But that's the beauty of it, is that we share this space all together, and you can choose one where it's just so funny to harp back on what Salma said earlier. And it's even with programming languages, there's some people out there that like within my own community here in Austin that I've said, oh yeah, those are all great. And they get all defensive. Oh, PHP sucks. No, it sucks, Fran. That you got to use this and Next.js rules and all. And I'm like, geez, y'all work. It's just code.
Just code.
Yeah.
Fun fact as well, that I am actually building What the Framework in Astro. So nice. I tried building quite a few things in Astro when it was like version 0. And I kept coming up against barriers because it was in early stages, and I couldn't get past. I couldn't do what I needed to do. But great news is that actually I've been able to do everything that I want to do on Astro now. It's come such a long way in a year. Very cool. And I'm excited about it. But again, I could have used a variety of different frameworks to build What the Framework. And who knows, maybe for fun, I'll build it in other frameworks that are suitable as well, just to show you that you can. But yeah, so I've been really enjoying using Astro. It's not my favorite. Don't have favorites, but it's been fun.
Is your current site on, is it on Next? Did you move your site to 11D? 11D.
Yeah.
Oh, 11D.
Yeah. So I moved from Next.js. I was doing a lot of work with Next.js when I was working at Contentful. And because of that, it naturally felt right at the time to experiment with Next.js and build my website in Next.js. But as I learned more, as I became more familiar with other options in the ecosystem, it's kind of like I wouldn't recommend Next.js for a blog site, for a static content. Like Next.js is so powerful, and you don't need that power when you're just putting out a few lines of blog. So I moved from Next.js to 11T. I wrote a huge blog about some amazing performance improvements that I got from that migration. And I am really passionate is the wrong word, but I'm really focused on removing as much JavaScript from my websites as possible, trying to ship the leanest sites possible, only use JavaScript when you have to. And of course, something like Next.js does deliver a lot of JavaScript by default because of the type of thing it is. It's an SPA. It's got all of this fancy stuff going on, and you don't need it. So I got some huge performance increases on my blog, moving it over to 11t, and I would get some similar improvements moving from Next.js to Astro, because it's these static site generator. It's like they're not really static site generators anymore. They're more like static first website builders. I think there's been a shift from static site generators, which seem pretty old school, pretty like beginning of the JAMstack, like 2015. Just here, build some static pages for me using JavaScript or Liquid or Nunchucks or something. But now we've shifted a little bit to the concept of a website builder that gives you static first, but then you can do all this other stuff. Like you can server-side render some pages if you want. You can add kind of state with React or Svelte or Preact or something, especially in Astro, you can bring your own framework. So I think it's more of like a static first website builder approach, which has brought more of like the fundamentals of the web into it. I'm actually writing a blog post at the moment about what the framework, and I went down this huge rabbit hole. I found a blog post released on the Twitter engineering blog in 2010.
I saw that tweet thread.
You see that tweet? And this was the beginnings of the single page application. Twitter were talking about rewriting their whole front end architecture in JavaScript, prioritizing navigating between routes like really quickly. It's the beginnings of the SPA as we know it. And I think it's all gone like full circle, like cyclical. We're going back to the principles of the way the web was built in the 90s and the early 2000s. There are always trade-offs, right? We've got like so much experience. We know a lot more now about CDNs, content delivery networks, and we know a lot more. We've got the edge now. And so we've got loads of different ways to render stuff on a server or serve static stuff from a place that we didn't have before. So it's like we've got all this knowledge. We've been on this ridiculously complex journey, but we're kind of coming back to basics a little bit with some of these new frameworks and tools that are coming out. And I am 100% for that.
Man, it's like retro.
Yeah, me too. I feel like it reprioritizes like HTML as like the first class citizen of the web instead of JavaScript, which I think is just good for everybody. Because like when you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, like, I mean, we have so much more semantic and expressive HTML tags to use. Like some of the built-in UI in the browsers is getting a lot better. So I'm all for that. And I think one of the things that when I started in like the mid, like 2010s like era, we talked a lot about like progressive enhancement and the idea that your website should work without JavaScript. And like maybe you have these features that get turned on with JavaScript, but sort of assume that it's disabled. And then that went away. And like that was just gone. Well, we can't do that. Like it has to work with JavaScript because all of this stuff is JavaScript. And now things like I think Astro and 11t are bringing that back. It's like, okay, here we're going to ship HTML first. And then what do you really need JavaScript for? And so that's
cool. I wrote a blog post about this that got a lot of spicy pushback, to be honest. It's called HTML is all you need to build a website. And the weird thing is that everybody assumed I was telling everyone just to release plain HTML websites. But the point of that is, like you say, Jeff, it's all you need. You can build an HTML page, a single document, index.html, serve that. If you correctly lay it out with the proper semantic HTML, it's expressive. Anyone can access it. And that is literally all you need. If you want to get something online, that is all you need. You don't have to learn CSS or JavaScript or anything. And especially with a web development platform like Netlify, you can literally drag and drop that index.html file onto a live URL. And that's it. And that's what I also like to talk about a lot, is that actually, if you think about it in terms of that, like, it's all you need. It's you just get it online, get something online, and then you've got a website. And then you can progressively enhance that as you go, literally just iterate on it and add a few bits here and there. And I think some people try to So people try to gatekeep the whole technology thing a lot. Oh, you can't just build a website just with HTML. That's far too simple. You have to go through hoops and you have to scratch your head for days and days about some weird JavaScript bug. It's like, you don't, right? Let's just build websites. Let's just get them out there and tell our story with these HTML pages. Why not, right? I cannot wait to teach my son HTML, and I can't wait to see his face when he puts his first HTML page on the internet. Like, I wish I could have had that opportunity. Like when I was 5, 6, I was just still plugging away in a basic terminal.
Wait, has he? How old
reserved our daughter's domain names like the day they were born. I was like, here you go. You can get your .com.
My son. Sorry, Fran. My son is 4. My son is 4 right now. He's getting on with reading. He's starting to learn to read. So I think maybe like this time next year, when he can read comfortably, I think that's the time. I'm just going to get him in DevTools and say, look, change that from blue to red. Add a border on that. And
You're such a cool mom. I wish my mom taught me HTML. I was raised the wrong way, guys.
Well, no, that was that was a long time ago when we were all youngins.
I wish my mom taught me HTML.
I'm not sure my mom knew how to get on the internet when I was that young. So or my dad. There is one thing. Oh, sorry. There was one thing I wanted to cycle back there too, because I think it's like an important thing to talk about, right? With this trend back towards HTML, and Salma, you mentioned the idea of gatekeeping. And I think like one of the things that I think this stuff does, it makes accessibility better in like 2 different ways, right? So it makes it more accessible for people who want to get into the field, because we're not throwing all of these contortions at them. But one of the things that really got me back into looking at, things like Astro, things like 11D and simplifying was like how complex it was to make these spas and JavaScript apps accessible for people, with visual impairments or, who needed to navigate via keyboard. And so like, I'm all for going back to that trend just because like, I feel like it makes it accessible for so many more people over slower networks and stuff like that.
You literally have to do less work as developers working with an HTML first kind of approach, like absolutely less work. So there are so many hoops sometimes you've got to jump through with spa-based frameworks and the things that you have to make sure that you are producing the correct HTML from your JSX, etc. You have to have a lot of underlying knowledge that if you go straight into React rather than learning HTML first, like that can be a huge learning curve. And I know a lot of people that I've seen in the wild who says, just learn React. Everyone needs to get a React job now. Someone said to me, there's no point in learning HTML. It's like, do you understand? It's the fundamental way that people view the web. Yeah. You have to know HTML. And
what does React produce?
What does React produce? HTML. Yeah. I think it's funny. I think kind of Salma answered my question, Jeff, so you can move on to yours, because it's like that's it. It's the retro cycle of this evolution of the JAMstack, right? Where it started at one place, decoupled, right, and then it has this circular pattern that goes around back to the basics of everything. I truly think that when this, I don't know when the idea and the concept first started, and then the approach, was embedded. Was it like 7 years ago, decoupled, like JAMstack? Do you guys?
It was around 2015.
2015, right? So I guess, Salma, this could be like a sub question in a sense. So the hardcore idea of, look, I'm going to pre-build my site, deploy it onto a CDN, and that's it. It's a static file that someone can access really quick, so that the performance is there. And then if you have low internet and all that, it's just right there. It's on a CDN. Just kind of could you give me your opinion on, do you feel like it's kind of, do you feel like the term JAMstack and decoupled is a little bit more than that now as it stands? Do you follow me on that question, if that makes sense? Yeah.
So I think JAMstack as a concept has always actually been quite confusing because initially the term came from the combination of JavaScript APIs and markup to create what you were talking about, static sites that was served from a CDN. And as technology developed, more and more tooling was added into that kind of workflow where people were working. You know, you had CI/CD built in, you've got built-in version control, integrations with Git, and you've got all sorts of other tooling around it. And it's kind of evolved more now. It's an architectural approach. And what's really difficult, I think, is that, so I recently helped author the newest Web Almanac JAMstack chapter, and which is going to be released quite soon.
Cool.
And what we actually concluded was that you can't really tell if a site is JAMstack or not, because it's not clear. It's an architectural approach. There are sites that may appear JAMstacky that are not, and vice versa. And so rather than now, back in the day when JAMstack was new, you'd be able to look at something and say, oh yeah, that's JAMstack, that's a static site, that's using that kind of template, that's built with Jekyll or whatever. And now you can have parts of a site that are JAMstacky. You can have single pages that are JAMstacky, but also single pages that are not. Because, for example, there are sites in the 90s, from sites built in the 90s are still online. They're like HTML files, but they're not JAMstack sites because they were put online before the kind of architectural concept was formed. They may be serving static files, but they're probably coming from a server and not a CDN, and they're not on the kind of web development platform that provides that external tooling and the whole web development platform that comes with it. So it's an architectural approach now. I think my colleague Phil Hawksworth recently on the Netlify blog released an updated JAMstack definition, if you want to go check that out as well. But there is this, it's difficult to navigate sometimes when you work for a company like Netlify that kind of created the JAMstack in its infancy, and it's kind of both are happening in parallel. It's like Netlify is the company that offers the web development platform. JAMstack is the concept, and I know that's quite difficult actually to be able to communicate effectively. And so it's going to evolve again as well. There are going to be more things that are added to this kind of architectural approach. And it's not even a stack anymore. It's not a stack. It's an approach. And the stack is ever evolving and ever changing, like with new frameworks and new tools. And so decoupled is a keyword, and fast and performant and cached is a keyword that but then you can do caching on any type of site. So it's an approach of trying to separate concerns, separate the front end and back end, store your data somewhere else, and just make cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I work at WP Engine now, and we have our own platform for headless WordPress, and it essentially does what Netlify does, except it's less feature rich, which my team at WP Engine, yes, please look at Netlify so we can get because we just added deployment previews and webhooks that Netlify had like since its infancy. So I think, and those are table stake features that are cool. But yeah, that is awesome, Sam. I fully agree with that. That is and I will check Phil's blog. Phil, hi if you're listening. Probably not.
So let's change gears a little bit. We've heard a lot. And Salma, I think you've mentioned this maybe once or twice, the idea of edge logic and edge functions. So could you kind of give our listeners a little bit of background on just what they are and when you might use them? And is there anything like Netlify is working on in this space that our users would be interested in?
Yes, definitely. So the concept of the edge kind of came about when the concept of the content delivery network came about at the beginning of the kind of JAMstack evolution. And a content delivery network is an intelligent network that when you request a static asset, the network knows where you are and it serves you that asset that's been cached on an edge node, right? It serves you that static asset from the closest location possible to you. And that's like the basis of the whole JAMstack static site model right from the beginning. So then a few years later, serverless functions came out. AWS Lambdas were like the pioneers in that. And they allowed you to run code, not just serve static code, but to run code from a running server somewhere that you didn't need to care about. So it took away the overheads of server maintenance and security and scaling. It took that away from the developer. You can just go and run some code if you need it on a server on demand and only pay for what you used. So the way I like to position the edge is that edge functions and now this new serverless edge stuff is the concept of a CDN plus the concept of serverless. So now you can run code at the edge at the closest location to the user with all the other kind of information about that user, such as their location, where they are, which could matter for a lot of things. So you might want to personalize a page based on where the user is. Say e-commerce, for example. Back in the day, e-commerce sites, you'd go onto an e-commerce site and you'd have to choose your currency from a dropdown or choose your location manually from a dropdown. But now with the edge, if you're running that server on the edge, if you're using serverless functions, or if you're doing some kind of edge rendering with whatever technology you're using, you can intercept the request to that page, find out where your user is, and then redirect them or rewrite the page based on where they are. And it's kind of opened up personalization and dynamic content to front-end developers like me that I wouldn't have been able to even like access, because I don't care about the back end. Like, thank you for keeping my servers running, but I don't care about it. I just want to do cool stuff right on the front end. So I can now. And Netlify Edge functions were released earlier this year. They're still in beta and we're working on them all the time. But now you can, in a very similar way to how you can just add Netlify serverless functions to your project, you can now add Netlify Edge functions to your project, and they run on the Edge network. And so, for example, if you need very low latency for a request, or you need to get location information or headers or cookies like from that very request, you can just add it to any project you want. And it's really quite exciting. And with Phil, my colleague Phil, we released an Edge Functions example site as well, showing you all the different things you can do with Netlify Edge Functions. And one of the key things to call out actually about Netlify Edge Functions is that rather than being node-based like serverless functions, they actually run on Dino, which is a newer runtime that runs on, is it based on web standards, right? So all of the things you look up on MDN, all the HTTP stuff, headers, cookies, whatever, it's all just baked in. And it's all if you know the web APIs, Dino doesn't have a big learning curve whatsoever. And I was initially a little bit scared. Oh, I don't know how to use Dino, but you don't really need to worry about that. It feels like, I hate this phrase, but it feels like it's closer to the metal of the internet. There's a less, I can't phrase this. There's fewer layers of abstraction from the actual internet when you're using Dino with Netlify inside Netlify Edge Functions, and it's pretty cool.
And I feel like that trend where we're using the web native request response objects, I'm seeing that happen more and more, even in the front end framework space. I know we were talking with Astro, and they do that. Next.js does some of that, and that I think is just such a cool trend, because then it's you're not, because one of the things I've always felt is with frameworks in particular, am I learning JavaScript or am I learning this framework? Am I learning the web or am I learning this framework? And the more we can learn the web or JavaScript and the less about a framework, I feel like that's just amazing, because that framework's going to come and go. It's going to have its life cycle, and eventually you'll move jobs. You'll work with something else eventually. And so having all that transferable knowledge from, the web APIs is awesome.
It's the same concept of learning HTML, isn't it? Learning HTML before JSX, learn the web before you learn some weird implementation of some other layer of abstraction. Let's bring it back to basics, and it opens it up to more people. It allows more job flexibility, like you said. It just makes the web better, because of how much more accessible it is and how less gatekeepy it is. And let's not like beat around the bush. Like, the web is the web, and that's what it is. And why hide it from people and try to rebuild it again? Just let everyone do it in the way that it was intended.
Salma, real quick, you said Netlify Edge functions are still in beta, but does it my kind friends at Netlify kept me on a Netlifriend account. Is it just in the, like, I can go to my Netlify UI and I can just enable Edge functions within the... They're
enabled by default. Anyone can use them. The reason why we say they're in beta is there just might be a few bugs here and there, and you can request new features. So they are not gated in any way. Anyone can use them. There are obviously fair use limits on the starter plan and things like that, but you can go and start adding Edge functions to your project today. And there's also like an extra layer of goodness as well, is that there are some of the frameworks in the ecosystem that are now supporting full server-side rendering on the edge. I think Astro is one of them. You can enable edge rendering. Too, Remix, and Quick is like an edge-first server-side rendered framework as well. And so what I love actually about some of this stuff is that platforms like Netlify are working with ecosystem tools to offer support for each other on day one. I remember when Edge functions came out, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that Astro had support for that straight away, I think. And we worked quite closely to ensure that developers could make use of these new functions when they were using these other frameworks. And that's what's really cool about it. And to blow our horns a little bit more is that we recently released at Netlify a new Next.js runtime, which supports this new Next.js advanced middleware concept, where actually what we've done is we've merged Next middleware with our Dino Edge functions. So actually, if you use Next on Netlify, you can do more.
Oh, wow.
Jeff, we're going to need to get into my Netlify. Let's mess around with that stuff, man. When we do a program sometime this week. Yeah, that'll be.
I'm interested in trying out some of the personalization stuff. That seems really powerful.
It's really cool. And I created a tutorial on this as a video tutorial on a blog post. And what's really cool is that previously with Next.js, if you wanted to personalize something using the middleware, if you wanted to send somebody off to like a personalized page, you'd have to do a URL rewrite. So you'd have to like maybe maintain however many pages you needed for each locale, or you'd have to server-side render every single page. But now with the Next.js advanced middleware on Netlify, you can actually rewrite the HTML of statically generated pages. You can do with all the other frameworks. Like you can intercept a request to a static page using get static props, get the location data or whatever, and then rewrite the response of the page based on whatever you need to do. And you can only do that on Netlify. And I hate to say stuff like this, but you can only do it. It's all open source. It's all open source. Yeah. So you can go and have a look at the code, but it's really cool. And I think it makes lives a little bit easier for developers, I think.
That is very cool.
And it's funny because I wanted to circle back real quick on what Salma was saying about like how Netlify and now like, with WP Engine here at Alice, we're kind of trying to make it accessible so that it's not a competition against like platforms, but more just like, hey, we're your tools, developers out there, and choose what you like because we can integrate and we have all these functionality with everything that you'd like to use. And actually, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but I'm going to drop a little secret right here on this podcast. So not only Salma, but I still keep in touch with a lot of my coworkers, my ex-coworkers from Netlify. Mr. Sean Grove reached out to me about 2 weeks ago. And stay tuned, folks. There might be something going on with WP Engine Netlify and WP GraphQL in the Netlify graph. But anyway, speaking of that segment, I know, Jeff, I didn't tell you.
No. Well, that's why I come to the podcast. Like, I get all the secret sauce.
Yeah, Sean Grove is mind-blowing because he'll just start rattling up. That guy's a genius. He's like, Fran, I got something. I think we could do something. I'm like, oh, crap, that's dope. So this is a good quick segue into what I was going to ask Salma. Is her and I, we chatted a little bit when I went over back to WP Engine on this DevRel team about decoupled and headless WordPress. Kind of two-pronged question for you, Salma. So just, have you gotten a chance to mess with headless WordPress at all? Have you?
Joe, I haven't, but I have noticed that you've got GraphQL and you've got a REST API, right? So you can do it two ways. Is that correct? Yeah. So, I mean, that is a wonderful developer experience in itself. You can, you're not like dictating how developers need to use the headless WordPress, and you can do it in ways you need to use. And I'm pretty sure it's just gives you back some nice JSON data, right? And so, I mean, what more can you ask for from an API? I don't know.
Yeah, the thing that it's funny because one of these days when you might have time, I was wondering if you ever want to like see it, because one of the things that like developers that come from a JAMstack background that have never touched WordPress, but it's interesting because WordPress has been around so long, so most developers have at least seen the interface, the WP admin and stuff like that. The one, it's not even a complaint, it's just a parody of being unshackled, if you will, and like being able to customize, is that a headless CMS like a Contentful or a Graph CMS gives you full power of making your content models, your fields, your type, all that, right? And you know exactly how that data scheme is going to look in that GraphQL layer. With WordPress, on the other hand, in WP Engine, we're trying to make that better. And Jeff's going to start nodding his head about this. It defaults with types, post, pages, and then there's this kind of like schema and hierarchy that it's not fully customizable out of the box, right? You get a GraphQL endpoint and it has its set already, it's already set up for you, right? But with the Contentfuls of the world, Salma, like you work there, it literally is, you start with nothing. You can make and customize your own content. So it's that trade-off.
I would argue, I would, sorry to interrupt, I would argue that actually that makes a lot of sense, because when people are using WordPress, they are familiar with posts and pages. I'm familiar with, you say posts and pages to me, it's like, yeah, dollar post, yeah, I got it. And maybe that's like a good thing. It's a familiar thing, because not every CMS can be everything to everyone either. It's again, like the whole use the right tool for the job. So if you, I don't know why I'm not qualified to provide this advice, but like if you keep headless WordPress in the same kind of style as non-headless WordPress, then they are more married and they can influence each other and they can work alongside each other a lot more. You can migrate easily from non-headless to headless if you've still got that same kind of constraints. I'm all for it.
Yeah. I agree.
I'll speak a little bit about that too, because I feel like, like Fran's right. There's not, and this is maybe like where WordPress headless and then WordPress like traditional or monolithic sort of are at odds with one another. So there's not a way, well, I guess there is a way. So with typical WordPress core, right, if I want to extend my data schema, like I used to have to write PHP or use some kind of plugin. And those are pretty much still the options, right? So I can make all the fancy data models that I want. If I want to, post type for, I don't know, space flights, and it's going to get like capture all these fields, I can make that happen. But it's not like baked into core. And that's been a feature that I think people have been wanting to see for a long time. But WordPress, in its infancy, kind of adopted this moniker of like decisions, not options. So like it's going to make the base level decisions for you and not give you a bunch of optional things that you can turn on. And so a lot of people in the community, there's a lot of split about like that philosophy in general, because like, custom fields and custom post types, like that seems like something that lots of people would want and should just be supported as part of core in a more holistic way, where now we have to sort of layer on plugins. And like, that's what I see happen with a lot of people coming to WordPress. It's like, there's this fatigue of not knowing how many plugins they need to install to get X result that some of these other things might just come with out of the box.
It's a dilemma for sure. I wish I knew more about it. But my experience with, a lot of people do talk about the fact that WordPress is plugin after plugin after plugin after plugin, and that's what the deal is. But that's that ecosystem, and that's how it's grown. And I think it's just like, it's getting a lot of jobs done. It's powering a lot of the internet, right? There's got to be something in that. It's a lot of what people reach for. And you maybe want to try WordPress again and even write PHP, just so I could experience the ecosystem quite a few years on. So I guess, kudos to that.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Salma wrote a GraphQL, WP GraphQL extension for something, or that would be pretty cool.
Don't quote me on that.
Okay. In respect to your time, Salma, we have 4 minutes, and Jeff, you have the next question, then I have my last question.
Yeah, sure. So, and I'll try and take this in a little bit of a different direction. So Salma, I'm looking at your About page, and one of the things that you mentioned, and I think are really well known for in the community, is elevating women and people from marginalized communities in the tech industry. And so there's a couple of different organizations that you're involved in, Women Who Stream.tech and Women of JAMstack. So is there anything you'd want to share with our listeners or us about what people can do to better support those goals? Because WP Engine is a company very committed to both of those things. And we definitely want to see, women and people of marginalized communities feel welcome and elevated in tech.
It's a weird thing, right? Isn't it? That a whole group of people are automatically excluded from this tech thing, right? It's just it's weird that we have to talk about this. And I actually this is a little bit weird, but I don't like the whole women in tech thing, because I get lumped in with women in tech things because I'm a woman in tech, right? So I was nominated for a Women in Tech award a while ago. It's I don't want to win an award for women. I want to win an award for people. Why should I have my own category? Just I'm not good enough to be with the men. So I gotta so I understand the concept. It's let's elevate women, let's celebrate women, but actually it kind of furthers the segregation. Let's bring everyone together. And so the reason why I made Women of JAMstack and Women Who Stream is I selfishly wanted a list of other women who were doing the same things as me. That's pretty much it. And it served also to highlight other people and bring my attention to other people so that I could support them I wasn't supported in the past, right? So I want to give back what I wanted when I couldn't get it. But it also, I shouldn't have to make these things. So that's why I also made Unbreak.tech, which for a while I was kind of fighting against this whole thing. And I was trying to, just make it about equality and not having to make it about we got a little women club, blah, 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 blah. I understand there needs to be safe spaces for women in this day and age, but also I'm confused. Anyway, so I made this other site called Unbreak.tech, which actually was aimed at men talking to men, because I thought, if you lot aren't listening to me, if men aren't listening, and a lot of men have the power to solve the problem by opening up spaces and making sure people are seen on the same stage, seen on the same lineups, and talked to in the same way. I made Unbreak.tech for other men to talk to other men, and it didn't work. I had hundreds of people said that they wanted to get involved, and I think I've got 20 people on the site. So it doesn't work either. And there was an article in the BBC that my mother-in-law shared with me this morning where Tim Cook is saying there are plenty of reasons that there aren't enough women in tech, but there are no excuses. And I think that's very valid.
Interesting.
There are so many reasons why I've considered leaving tech just this week, because just I'm always automatically like considered less competent, than the men. And always any piece of content that I like release, I have to be so like calculated. It's like, right. So I have to make sure that I don't do this, don't do that, because the replies are going to come for me,
Yeah.
So it shouldn't have to be like that. But I don't feel like I have the power to change it. People in power have the position that people in power have the power to change it. They're in the positions to influence and to talk out about it, but people don't. It's hard. It's weird that it has to exist. And it sucks, but here we are, and here I am, and I carry on.
So don't quit, because if you quit, I'll cry. If you leave,
yeah, please don't.
I might leave. And it's definitely hard, because the thing is that like also, you talk about marginalized people and women and stuff like that. Me being a mixed race, sometimes I feel kind of like in the room. I'm male, but because I'm like a minority, it's that feeling of like, oh my God, here are all these like developers like underneath me, and I just don't. Luckily, I've been blessed in my path with people like Salma, you, Jeff, Kellen, and who have been more than, gracious, Jason Langsdorff, in helping me improve. And those are the kind of people I think that we need more of in tech, as Salma was saying, because the authority has the power to change the influence. So yeah, that's awesome. Okay.
That's another thing as well. Like, I will just, when you said, you're mixed race in tech, I'm mixed race in tech. And sometimes I feel like, because there are so many, like there are ethnic minority groups in tech. Like I don't fit in any of them. I'm too white for that one and too brown for that one. And it like, what do you do? So again, it's further segregation. And I understand, again, there needs to be safe spaces for people who are marginalized. There needs to be safe spaces for people to grow and prosper without being at risk from the weird attacks that we get from other places in the internet. But again, it narrows it down. I don't fit anywhere. I don't feel like I fit anywhere. So I think that's one of the reasons why, like, I don't like being lumped in with women, right? I don't like it. And so there must be other people out there who are feeling like that. So why can't we just like people, right? People in tech.
People. Yeah.
And I sit here as like a white cis man hearing all these things, and just like my heart breaks on the inside for you all, because like I don't know what that feels like. And and I appreciate that you shared this other project, because I do think that like having people be very vocal allies when stuff like this happens is an important aspect of moving towards, like what you said, like we shouldn't have to talk about this. Like it should just be everybody's accepted by default, and accessible to everyone. So we'll definitely plug that project as well, because
thank you.
Yeah.
We're
it's not good. I mean, there's probably no point because no one really cares about it, but I appreciate that. And, who knows what will happen in the future, but I just hope that maybe like it will be better when my son grows up to hopefully work in tech, maybe.
Yeah. And your own daughter too, Jeff, because as well, because you're,
yeah. Well, and I mean, like I see her come home from school now, and she's exceptionally good at math, and she's 6 and like a whole grade level ahead of everybody else. People will still tell her things that are just wrong. Like as a father, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like this child is clearly smarter than you. Why are you telling her she can't do this? And it's like, it's insane. It's insane. So.
And Salma, do you have time for one more question, or do you have a hard?
I have time for one more question.
Okay. So it's that time in the podcast for Fran's fun question. So we all of us developers know that you cannot code 24/7. I always say this, you do need to rejuice your batteries, if you will. And sometimes out there for newer developers getting into it, do not bang your head against something so long that it starts having diminishing returns. So Salma, when you get to that point, what do you do for fun when you need a break from coding?
I go and sit somewhere else. I mean, that's all there is to it, really. I go and walk over the other side of the room, or go and look at something else or I lie down or I go to sleep. I mean, if it's the nighttime, I go to sleep and then I'll solve the bug in my head at that point, or I'll have a snack or I'll have a drink or I'll cook something or I'll plan the next house renovation, basically anything else. Because, when your brain is in that debugging zone and you're banging your brain cells against a wall, there is no point in carrying on. And there's some kind of science behind doing something else that your brain rewires itself or something to automatically just get the answer and think about it in a different way. So anything else, play the piano,
I was going to say, do you start playing music? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's funny. I don't do anything intentionally. I just stop coding and do something else. And that's works for me.
Oh, I'm going to try that today. Instead of rock climbing, I'm just going to do a Salma approach and I'm going to stop coding and I'm going to do what comes next. I don't know. Go to the grocery
just do
whatever. All right. Well, Salma, I appreciate your time. And this was such a treat for me. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes.
I definitely kind of want to, I'll DM you. I'll leave all the links for all our audiences, all the stuff that we mentioned on Salma's projects and Netlify and all the good stuff. In the future, would love to jump on a stream with you and show you the WordPress data schema and its GraphQL layer and everything like that.
Let's do it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks,
cheers, y'all.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Thanks, Jeff. You too.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Headless WP podcast. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and give us a share or a like on whatever platform you're listening on. And be sure to keep in touch with the WP Engine Developer Relations team on Twitter, Discord, or through our website. Thanks for listening.